I don't normally do videos like this on specific topics, but I absolutely felt like I had to do something for this disgusting situation involving id Games, Bethesda, Marty Stratton, and Mick Gordon. For those of you who don't know, Mick Gordon is the maker of the soundtrack from Doom 2016 for the most part, as well as a good chunk of the soundtrack from Doom Eternal. This entire fiasco revolves around the blatant lies that Marty Stratton put out into the world 2 years ago and Mick's recent response to it. Mick was allegedly tied down legally, which is why he took so long to respond to the original claims of Marty, which were very damning and caused a lot of damage to Mick's career, but we'll get to that. And his statement has shown just how much of the original one, Marty's statement, is a complete lie. Marty Stratton was and is the executive producer on Doom Eternal. His job was to finish the game and coordinate with individual people working on various aspects, with most decisions coming down to him as far as what was done, when, and how. In May of 2020, Marty put out a massive post on Reddit of all places explaining problems primarily revolving around the Doom Eternal soundtrack and why there were so many obvious issues with the tracks themselves when compared to the previous game. Mostly, this piece is a complete assassination attempt to divert and shift all blame onto Mick Gordon, as well as saying that he as an individual only edited and mixed 12 of the 59 tracks on the OST, with the leader editor doing most of the work. The entire article essentially reads out as, "We were so nice and kept giving him deadlines and he kept falling behind," Mick that is, with them eventually being forced into using the internal editor of their soundtracks to finish the OST. Marty claims that the songs that Mick delivered, only 9 out of 12 requested by the deadline he specifically mentions, were far below the quality that Doom Eternal had come to expect and were disrespectful to the franchise as a whole. The problem with the soundtrack that a lot of people have is that it's very shoddy work, looking like a first year's editor's first few attempts at making music. There are so many sections that are copy pasted and sound atrocious, and most of the tracks were loops and repeats of things from other songs and segments just constantly thrown about. All of the blame in this statement was put square on Mick, not Chad, the internal composer, saying that the projects themselves were bad from the beginning and Chad had saved him and done the best he could with a shitty situation. There were so many constant things such as, "We're disappointed, but we're on your side," and "We didn't want to be misleading," which ironically is what this all turned out to be. But the TLDR is that the soundtrack sucked and they threw Mick under the bus for it to direct the ire of all the fans to him rather than ID and Bethesda as a whole, or id Software. To which, of course, Mick says a lot of awful things happened, including harassment, the ruining of his career, public humiliation, and a ton of other nasty things that rabid fans do to people when they're pissed off about something they like being harmed. Anyway, you know all that previous stuff about how it was Mick's fault and none of it was the fault of id Games or Marty or Bethesda in any capacity? Well, it turns out it was all bullshit. As stated, Mick released a massive response in the last week regarding the allegations that sat so long. I won't get to everything because it's like a freaking essay, but yeah, it essentially points out how his working conditions were horrid and there were way more things going on behind the scenes, making it impossible for him to deliver way more than what was claimed. You may think it's weird to respond 2 years after the accusations, but it's really not when you consider lawyers and other variables involved. He obviously wanted to make sure he was okay before doing it and that he had all the proof and information he needed to disprove the original claims. The most damning thing to me is that the fact that Mick claims after the initial post on Reddit, they tried to offer him a 6-figure settlement to shut up. It's really a testament to the fact that they knew this was all lies from the beginning and they were just trying to save bad PR from bad decisions. When Mick started working at id on Doom Eternal, he was handed a music schedule that required 2 tracks be done per month. That obviously is a strict schedule, but not impossible at face value, and he says that it quickly became apparent how disconnected it was from the game's actual development. The game was going to be launched in 2 years from that point, which meant that it wasn't even in a playable state yet, and they were demanding final tracks of music for the game before the composer even had a chance to play it. It specifically requested that the music matched the gameplay, but there was no gameplay for him to look at, with it being cited that the build wasn't stable enough to even provide that stuff. So what did they give him to start the soundtrack? Concept art for levels. To put this bluntly, it'd be like asking Hans Zimmer to do the score for the Lion King movie, and all you gave him was a picture of a cat. No context, no story, nothing else. There were no details on boss encounters, cutscenes, main menu design, game flow, story, lore, or character arcs. Those were still a year plus out, and yet they expected him to be able to deliver. Other issues plagued this deal from the beginning, claims Mick, including a contract delay, which delayed the start, a 2-week all hands on deck marketing meeting, which delayed it further, and various other things like communication taking days to get back to him on things he had a strict deadline for and needed to be approved and fixed. Mick says that 2 months in of struggling with this, he proposed a solution because it obviously wasn't going to work, offering to write theme-based music that allowing him to adapt to gameplay and things that were given to him later. He'd ramp up production and change things to meet the same key dates, which is a perfectly reasonable solution, as he could not make specific music for stuff he hadn't even seen yet. Marty straight up struck that down by basically ignoring the issue and saying, stop causing problems and do your job, with no willingness whatsoever to help Mick get this done. Mick worked tirelessly on this soundtrack. The dude had an impossible task and allegedly was working 12 to 16-hour days at points and sleeping under his desk, stressed out of his mind because he had no other option than to keep going or break contract. He genuinely cared about the project and tried to deliver the best he was capable, delivering lots of tracks that were completely rejected because, surprise, surprise, they didn't fit the stuff he was given later that he never had to begin with to work off of. Imagine spending months working on things only to get them immediately rejected and told to be thrown out because your boss doesn't tell you what he needs you to do. He just tells you to make things with no context. It's disgusting. What made things worse is that the level design team had no idea where to put music in the game design and how much should be used, which would lead to a lot of the gameplay sounding empty. And when he brought up this concern, it was thrown away and ignored. He was ignored so much that eventually they stopped inviting him to music meetings in the game he was supposed to compose the tracks to, ignoring his emails and ignoring every other attempt he was making to communicate to make this work. It all boiled down to more crunch, less sleep to keep this going. Another insane thing is that he wasn't even paid for over 11 months from what I read through all of his working, not once until everything was settled. And to me, that's just bogus. Imagine working at a job for almost an entire year and not getting any pay whatsoever, with your entire payment being based on whether or not you completed an impossible task. Thank God that they did end up eventually paying him because they recognized it'd be hell if they didn't. But treating someone like shit for that long and abusing them as a worker and not paying them a dime until after the fact is just alarmingly awful to hear about. Cut to the Doom Eternal OST announcement on June 6, 2019, being delivered with the collector's edition. Funniest thing is that the soundtrack did not exist when it was announced, and it wasn't even close to being finished. Obviously, being the composer and responsible for this, you'd panic, having been struck down at every point and working in the worst conditions imaginable, only to be told, lol, now the community expects it at this exact date and time. The standalone OST wasn't even in production at all, and he hadn't even been offered a contract to produce it, and they hadn't even held a meeting to discuss it, the time frame, or if it was even feasible to do. He wasn't even told directly. He learned about it on social media. Mick pushed the issue and Marty once again ignored him, leading to more stress and more worry and insane amounts of pressure. Consumer production laws means you can't sell things that don't exist, which in this case, the OST didn't. But yeah, whatever. id and Bethesda obviously didn't give a shit. There's a lot more to that specific stuff, way more delays and issues and problems, which you can read yourself. But the general theme is, oh God, oh shit, I can't do this. You're not helping me, Marty, and I need help. Give it a little bit, and we cut to Marty finally deciding not to want to only use Mick anymore because of insane deadlines, bringing in Chad Mossholder to make an alternative OST from songs and materials that have been provided leading up to that point by Mick. Apparently they had a secondary composer, which was Chad, working on the music the entire time behind the scenes without Mick knowing. What Chad essentially did was take all of Mick's work and copy paste it around to make new songs and new tracks, with segments and sections just being remixed and recomposed to look new, even though a lot of them still sounded like shit. He also took a lot of stuff from the game's W-Wise package and remixed a ton of things into songs, if you could possibly even call them that, with the edits themselves being offensive to anyone who understood music. I quote, "The edits had been eyeballed in a slapdash way by copying audio files directly on top of each other without even a crossfade to cover the transition, resulting in clicks, pops, clipping, abrupt tempo changes, awkward gaps, and jarring transitions." None of this was good enough. It was awful, and it would lead to a lot of further problems because Mick obviously wasn't able to deliver all the tracks needed to finish Doom Eternal's OST. Also, just to add insult to injury, of the songs that Mick had given to id Software and had been approved, some of them were edited and changed to include Chad as a co-composer, even though he had hardly touched them and or worked on them. Imagine painting an entire portrait and then someone signs their name and gets credit. That's essentially what happened. Oh yeah, and they also used a couple of songs on the soundtrack that were rejected that Mick wasn't going to get paid for, that he argued for later, getting payment further on after this entire fiasco. And yeah, it's just shit. I could go on way more for all the individual things that just made this worse, but the summary is this: Marty fucked over Mick so incredibly hard, and everything that was scapegoated onto Mick is a lie. It themselves caused tremendous issues by being horribly managed the entire way, and Bethesda was indirectly responsible by approving dates and setting deadlines without being told how impossible they were. It's insane that they would throw someone who brought us such insanely good music under the bus and do this to them, but I'm not surprised. Bethesda and its subsidiaries have had a long known history of being awful to their employees. Look no further than Fallout 76. I really just wanted to make more people aware of this shitty situation and bring light to just how bad it is, and I didn't even name everything. Mick's a great composer, and it's clear that he got the short end of the stick in this, and I personally will be supporting him as best as I can going forward in the future. Let me know what you think about this entire situation down below and leave comments. If I missed anything or slightly said something wrong, please correct me. I'll include all the links to the context and full responses so you can read them in your own time. You know the deal. Like the video, share it, support the channel. Until the next video, this is Delrith, and I'll be seeing you. Bye.